ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today I thought I'd do something a little bit different. Instead of standing in front of a whiteboard, I thought I would sit down. I got a brand new backdrop. I got all these curtains up. Yeah, they're hilarious. I can't stop laughing at them. But anyway, so today what I wanted to do was sit down and listen to a podcast and pause it occasionally and give you my reaction. So the podcast I decided to start with is an episode of What Bitcoin Did. The host is Peter McCormick. Of course, I will link to this in the description. And the episode actually dropped today. The title is The Ultimate Bitcoin 101 with Vijay Boyapati. So Vijay is a really smart guy. He's very well spoken. He is a Bitcoin advocate. And I guess in this episode, he is going to give a Bitcoin 101, an overview. So I have not listened to it yet. So I don't know what he's going to say or not, but I do know that he is a huge advocate of Bitcoin, as am I. So I probably will agree with him on a lot of things. But I will pause the podcast and let you know what I'm thinking, if he's making any arguments, if he's giving any opinions, and I will say whether I agree or disagree and why, and whether I think his arguments are strong or weak and why. So should be fun. We'll see how it goes. Oh, I do want to read a quote, a little teaser that he says at some point in the episode. So let me read what he says here. Go and buy some Bitcoin, even if it's a small amount. You don't have to have a huge amount in your portfolio, but you shouldn't have zero. Zero doesn't make any sense. This is one of the most exciting innovations to money in 1,000 years. So generally speaking, I agree with him. Zero Bitcoin in your portfolio doesn't make sense unless you're deathly afraid of Bitcoin. If you're really, really afraid of Bitcoin, then okay, I guess zero Bitcoin makes sense for you. But does it make sense to be deathly afraid of Bitcoin? I think fear of any kind is a product of ignorance. So if you're afraid of spiders, it's because you're just ignorant about what spiders are and whether or not they're dangerous to you and so forth. If you're afraid of public speaking, it's just because you don't understand public speaking. You don't know the risks. You don't know what'll happen. You don't know how people will perceive you. You just don't know. It's just ignorance, right? It's uncertainty. So I think if you're afraid of Bitcoin, it's just because you don't understand it. You don't know the details. You don't know how it works. You don't know the risks involved and so forth. So if you are afraid of Bitcoin, the first step is to admit it, I guess. And then the second step is to work on your ignorance of Bitcoin. Just learn more about it. Just learn more about it. And then you can make calculated risks instead of just emotional reactions. So anyways, let's get to the podcast.
Because this is the perennial question, man. What is Bitcoin?
Okay, so Bitcoin is a new form of money that exists on the internet. And many people may not know that gold was money just 100 years ago. And the simplest way I like to describe Bitcoin is that it's digital gold, because it shares many of the properties that made gold fantastic as money for thousands of years. Except, like you said in the intro, it has this extra magical property that you can teleport it anywhere around the world. Gold, you can't do that.
Okay, yeah, I think Bitcoin is digital gold is a very, very helpful way to understand it. But a lot of people, yeah, I think Peter actually is about to ask the question, why would people care about gold? A lot of people don't care about gold. They don't realize why gold was money and why gold is money and the US dollar, for example, is not money. It's fake money. So I think they're going to get into that right now.
Why would I even care about gold? Like, some of my friends would never have bought gold before, so why should they care about digital gold? What's the big deal with gold?
The big deal about gold is that you can hold your savings and never be afraid that they're going to be debased by a government. And that may not sound that interesting or relevant to people who live in the West, but if you've lived in a country like Zimbabwe or Venezuela or Argentina, then you really viscerally understand what it feels like to have your savings destroyed by a government mismanaging their monetary system. And the Western monetary systems are not immune to this, and we are really in uncharted waters right now with the way central banks are managing monetary policy. So we don't know what the future is going to look like, and the ability to keep your savings free of debasement and confiscation is a very, very powerful thing that gold offered to people for thousands of years.
Okay, so what he's talking about debasement and how people in the Western world might not understand, but people who have lived in some of these other countries do understand. Here's how I'll describe it for people in the Western world who might not get it. Like, why should I care about gold? Why should I care about digital gold? Why should I care about debasement? Like, what is that? There's a basic principle of of economics, of human behavior, that the value of something will tend to move towards its production cost. Basic principle. So if something is very easy to produce, it will tend to be very cheap to buy and sell in the economy. Conversely, if something is very difficult to produce, it will tend to be worth a lot of money. It'll tend to convey a high value in the economy. So for example, if I go out and mine an ounce of gold, right, it takes a certain amount of effort. Let's say it's $2,000 worth of effort, okay? If someone all of a sudden invents some really easy way to produce gold, to mine gold and, turn it into coins and so forth, if someone invents some really easy way to do that and they find all this gold that's out there and it only costs them $100 to produce an ounce of gold, to find it, to mine it, to melt it down, whatever, then the gold that I have that cost me $2,000 to acquire is now only worth $100 because all of a sudden it's very easy to produce new ounces of gold. Okay? On the other hand, if I start and I produce an ounce of gold and it takes like $2,000 worth of effort, and now it's getting harder and harder to find and mine new ounces of gold, then my value of gold will go up because it's getting harder and harder and harder for other people to get gold. Okay, that's gold. It applies to anything. For example, a dollar bill itself, right? If a dollar bill is hard for you to earn, right? You got to go to work. I don't know how long you'd have to work, a certain number of minutes to earn a dollar, something like that. Okay, fine. What about the next dollar, right? And it's not just you earning it, it's other people. Do people have to work longer and longer and longer to earn a dollar? Or do they work shorter and shorter to earn a dollar? And if you know how dollars are created, right, they're not found in caves somewhere or rivers or buried underground. They're just printed digitally. The Federal Reserve just clicks a button and they can create as many dollars as they want, which means it doesn't take any energy, it doesn't take any effort to produce a new dollar, which means the value of your dollars are going down and down and down and down over time because it's trivially easy to produce a new one. It's not easy for you to produce it, right? You have to go to work. You have to do something. So it takes some amount of effort. It takes some amount of effort for you to produce a dollar. But there's someone out there called a central banker who requires zero effort to produce new dollars, and then he gets to spend them. So the value of your dollars and my dollars and everyone's dollars are going to go down and down and down and down over time to eventually meet the value of what it costs to produce a new dollar, which is nothing. So that is a known thing. The question is, how fast does the value of a dollar go to zero? And where Bitcoin is relevant is that it's like digital gold in that it gets harder and harder and harder to create new Bitcoins. Harder and harder and harder. And maybe they'll go into the mathematics or the computer programming of why that is the case, and it's something I can do in a subsequent video. But essentially it gets harder and harder and harder to find or to make new Bitcoins, which means the value of each Bitcoin, even the old Bitcoins, right, will go up over time. So it's programmed to function that way. It's programmed so that the Bitcoins will get more valuable over time.
Why should people actually care about Bitcoin? Because for a lot of people, they're looking, they go, this is just some funny money on the internet. Why should they actually care?
So money is the most important economic good in any developed society. It's the foundation for all trade and savings. And Bitcoin is the most important, at least in my opinion, it's the most important innovation to money in 1,000 years. And Bitcoin makes it possible to do something that has literally never been possible to do in the history of the entire world. And that is to send value quickly and easily to anyone, anywhere on Earth, without anyone's permission, as easily as sending an email.
Yeah, I've got to say something about that. He's absolutely right when he says that Bitcoin allows people to send value around the world relatively instantly, very, very quickly, like gold with teleportation. What's super powerful about Bitcoin is that it has solved several problems, one of which is a computer science problem which is how do you send unique value across the internet? So the internet itself was very powerful because it allowed us to send copies of information around the world. So in order for me to send you an email, I create the file on my computer, and then I send information to recreate a copy of the file on your computer. So when you check your email, you're seeing a copy of the file that I created. You know, sites like Napster and all these file sharing programs do the exact same thing, right? Web pages do the exact same thing. Someone creates a file somewhere, whether it's a sound file, video file, a Word document file, any type of file, and then they send it around the world, right, to somebody else, and they recreate the file on their computer. That's how a web page works. That's how everything works. So you can copy information, and we've been able to do that for decades on the internet, and that has obviously radically transformed society. I mean, like, it's incredible. But the problem has existed for a long time of how do you send unique value over the internet? How do you send an original? And how do you know that it is an original? And we haven't been able to solve that problem since the internet was created until Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin. And the exact details of what he did are a little bit too complicated just to explain right now, but what he was able to achieve is exactly what I just said, the ability to send unique value over the internet and to know that you're getting the original. And that is critical in order to have a digital money. You have to know that you're sending the original dollar or the original Bitcoin in this case, the original unit. So now that we have a digital money that is possible, incredible things are going to be possible for our society, things that weren't possible previously. And we're living through it right now, and it seems crazy to me to ignore it or to not be a part of it or to just dismiss it out of hand because it's not going away. The cat is out of the bag. So let's keep going with the podcast.
I just want to touch on the thing you said without anyone's permission. Vijay, if I wanted to send you some money, if I wanted to send you some dollars, I could send it through PayPal, send it through the bank. I don't have to get any permission to do that, do I?
Well, it depends on what your political views are. I think more and more people are realizing that these large corporations have a tremendous amount of power to decide who is censored and who is not censored. And whether you agree or not with who they're censoring, it could be that at some point in the future, you're the person getting censoring. And that's a really disturbing thing to happen when your ability to communicate with others or to send value to people you care about is stopped by a corporation or by a government. And that's really something that Bitcoin disrupts and prevents. No one has control and no one can prevent you from sending value to anyone that you want to send value to.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful point as well, is that a lot of people don't realize, but when you have Bitcoin and you use the Bitcoin network, you can send a transaction to anyone, anywhere in the world, at any time, 24/7, without anyone's permission. You don't need a third party. You don't have to go through a custodian, such as Coinbase or anything like that. You don't have to go through PayPal. You don't have to go through a national or an international bank. You just use the Bitcoin network directly, and you can send money to anyone, anywhere in the world. It's extremely, extremely powerful. It's extremely liberating. It's extremely democratic, and it's extremely egalitarian because it puts everyone on the same playing field, right? There's no like banks and then everyone else is a subject of banks and subservient to banks. It's just everyone. Everyone has equal power. Everyone is their own bank. So it's very, very, very powerful.
All right, so what else does Bitcoin fix?
So fundamentally, Bitcoin creates a foundation for a new financial system where individuals can keep their savings and transfer them without requiring anyone's permission. It's a very powerful feeling if you've never experienced it before, to be able to hold your savings in your pocket and to go anywhere on earth without anyone stopping you. So you could cross a border with a USB drive holding $10 million if you had $10 million, and no one would be the wiser. It's a very, very powerful feeling if you've ever experienced that, being able to keep your savings on you without anyone being able to interfere with that.
Yeah, it's interesting you should pick.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. And I've done that, not with $10 million, of course, but with the amount I do have, I've done that crossing international borders, several of them. So it is extremely liberating. And before I crossed borders, for example, from the United States into Mexico, I had a thumb drive with Bitcoin on it, and I also had a safe with ounces of gold and silver in it, both with me. And I decided not to take the safe across the U.S.-Mexico border for fear of what might happen. And so I had to get rid of that. Actually, the physical nature of that money was actually a liability. You know, a lot of people say like they want to be able to touch their money and hold it in their hand. I totally get that. But in the particular circumstances that I had, the physical nature of the money was a liability. I actually preferred the digital nature. So I was able to take the Bitcoins with me and no one had any idea. And I left the gold and silver behind and came back and got it almost a year later. So yeah, something to keep in mind.
Pick on Argentina because I was in South America last year, and talking to people from Argentina, Bitcoin makes total sense to them. When I try and explain it sometimes to my friends, it doesn't make total sense. But Argentina's been through multiple inflationary events, but also been through events where people haven't actually been able to go into the bank and get their money out. They've actually been stopped from accessing their money just due to incompetent central bank policy.
Once confidence is lost in the financial system, it can disappear overnight. So I would say that the future is very, very uncertain. Central bankers like to pretend that everything's okay, but we don't know. And having something that you can trust that doesn't rely on the whims of central bankers who really, honestly, I don't think know what they're doing. They're making this up as they go. Having something that you can hold on to that no one else controls is a powerful thing.
Yeah, and he mentioned there that when confidence in the monetary system starts to go away, it can disappear overnight. And he's right. This is so important to understand because we've seen this happen around the world throughout history. Is the idea of gradually, then suddenly, right? People gradually lose faith, and then suddenly it all goes at once. It all comes tumbling down very, very quickly. And so what I would say to people who maybe aren't sure, like, oh, should I trust the financial system or not? I mean, it seems kind of stable. It seems like we've recovered, or maybe I'm not sure what to believe. The important thing, I think, is not so much what you believe is the case right now, whether banks are strong or weak, or the economy is strong or weak or whatever. Pay attention to what people believe about the system. That is more important. It doesn't matter so much what you believe. It matters if you can assess what everyone else believes accurately. Right? If you can accurately assess what other people believe. So hopefully that makes sense. But even if the system survives another 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever, if you can accurately tell how many other people and which type of people in society believe in the system and which don't, and watch those trends over time, you'll be able to position yourself to take advantage of whatever happens. So if a lot of billionaires don't trust the system and they do something else, is there a way you can profit off that? If a lot of poor people trust the system, can you profit off that? If a lot of poor people don't trust the system, can you profit off that? If middle class people are doing this or that or the other thing, can you profit off that? Like, in other words, you want to watch the trends and make a decision for yourself that anticipates what comes next. That's investing.
Vijay and I as Bitcoiners, we know that Bitcoin is the best form of money. Trying to convince that to other people is, it's quite a tricky thing, but this is what we're going to do in the next section. So, Vijay, why is Bitcoin the best form of money?
Bitcoin is the best form of money because it has the properties that make for good money. And we've known what these properties are since the time of Aristotle, so we've known them for a very, very long time. Divisibility, that can be divided into smaller units. Durability, it can't be destroyed easily. So, for instance, wheat is not a very good form of money. Portability, so it's easy to transport. A cow is not very good money. And perhaps most importantly is scarcity. Something that's super abundant, like sand, is not good as money because money fundamentally gets its value from its scarcity. Anything that people perceive is very abundant is not going to be very useful as money.
So quite an interesting thing we can throw in there, as it always I find is a really good example, is that cigarettes in prison are a great form of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that is because there is a perception of scarcity within the prison, and the thing that bootstraps the value of a cigarette in prison is that some people want to smoke and they have an addiction to smoking, so it gives that sort of base demand. And once there's that base demand, people realize, hey, this is useful for trade as well, because people will accept it, and once they accept it, then you can use it for savings and you can use it for trade.
Another interesting one I found out.
Yeah, another comment on cigarettes as money in prison. Another thing is that cigarettes can't be made by prisoners, right? They're very hard to produce more of, so that's part of where the scarcity comes from.
Okay, so if we're comparing Bitcoin to fiat, which is the pounds, the dollars, etc., and gold, what are its advantages?
So Bitcoin's primary advantage over gold is its portability. It's really inconvenient to carry gold around, which is why most gold sits in a bank vault. And the problem with having gold in a bank vault is that you then have to trust the bank. And so to give an example of this, not at the individual level, but at the level of a nation state, Venezuela had a lot of its gold with the Bank of England. And recently they said, hey, can we have our gold back? And the Bank of England said, no, we're not going to give you your gold back because we don't like your government anymore. And so that's a real problem, is that gold is inconvenient, and the inconvenience, its physicality, means that there's this tendency to storage being centralized in these institutions like banks, and then the banks have a lot of power and control over whether you can get your gold or not. Bitcoin's primary advantage over fiat money is that you don't require the permission of governments or banks to use it, and all you really need is a connection to the internet to be able to use your Bitcoin. The other big advantage over fiat money is that fiat money is debased over time by governments, and governments try and fund their operations through inflation, which means that anyone who's holding their money loses the value of that money over time.
Yeah, he's spot on with that one, and it's the same recipe from one country to another throughout the last several centuries. It's really the same thing. If the government can create more monetary units, then anyone who's holding those monetary units is getting poorer and poorer and poorer just by saving.
Right. What about its weaknesses? There must be some weaknesses to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think because it's so new, it's still not easy enough to use. And people who are coming to Bitcoin with no experience in the space, maybe they're not computer scientists, they're not tech geeks, it might seem a little scary, rightly so. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make Bitcoin much, much easier to use. And so it's sort of similar to the internet in the early days. Like, my parents would have had no idea how to use the internet in the late 90s, but now it's a very important part of their lives. And I think the same thing is going to be true for Bitcoin. But this also means that there's a huge opportunity for people who are willing to put in the effort and read about it and go figure it out and figure out how to go buy and own some Bitcoin and store it themselves. There's a huge, huge opportunity for those people to go ahead and put the work in.
Yeah, big time. He's absolutely right. Bitcoin is difficult to use if you want to use it sort of correctly, or the way it was designed without a third party. It's very difficult to use. It is technical. However, there is such a huge opportunity. If you're willing to put in the time, if you're willing to learn, you can acquire Bitcoins far more easily now than you will be able to in the future. So in other words, you can spend a tiny little bit of energy to get them now, and you'll be able to trade them or sell them or spend them, whatever word you want to use, to get a lot of energy in the future. A lot of energy. Like, a lot. So if you're willing to put in the time, it will almost certainly be worth it.
Like buying Amazon or Google 1 or 2 years into their after the launch of their business.
Yeah, but I think a better analogy would be to say, imagine that there was something which was a share of the internet, not a specific company, but a share of the internet in 1993, and you could buy a fraction of the internet. I mean, that sounds like one of the greatest bets in history if you could have done that. And that's what I think Bitcoin is. It's buying a share of a new financial system, which I think is going to replace the global financial system in the next 20 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with him on that one. Buying some Bitcoin is like buying a share of the internet, if such a thing were possible. So Bitcoin isn't a company. It doesn't have a CEO. It doesn't have a headquarters. It doesn't have an office. It's a money and a payment network, like rolled into one. And you can own a share of it just by owning the money. So it's not even like owning shares in one of the early tech companies like Amazon, Google, or something like that. It's even better. It's even better than that.
Could Bitcoin then end up destroying other currencies?
So that's a great question. I think first and foremost, I think people will no longer want to save in fiat currencies. So when you think about saving in the future, you're going to think about Bitcoin. And when you think about spending, you might still think about using your nation's currency. And that's not that crazy an idea. In Argentina, for example, they've had several monetary crises over the last few decades. People want to save in dollars. If they can, they'll save in dollars. And when they want to spend, they'll spend in pesos because the peso loses value really quickly. And I think that's pretty much a vision for what might happen in the future. Nations are going to be very reluctant to get rid of their own money. But even if their money exists, people won't want to use it for anything but that last minute spending. When they're saying, I went to work, I earned some money, I want to keep it in Bitcoin. I think that's going to be the mindset.
Yes, I totally agree. That is exactly the future I see as well. And historically, we do see examples of that. Like people used to denote their savings in gold because gold couldn't be debased. And if they ever went to spend, they would spend in the local currency. So if they lived in the United States, they would spend in U.S. dollars. If they traveled to Canada, they convert some of their gold into Canadian dollars and spend the Canadian dollars. If they travel to Thailand, they convert some of their gold into Thai baht and they spend the baht. And otherwise, they just keep their savings in gold. And I think, just as Vijay is saying here, that people will start to denote their own savings in Bitcoin. How many Bitcoins do they have? That's what they're going to think of as their wealth. And if they need to spend, they'll convert some of those Bitcoins into whatever local currency they're at. And it could be a nation's currency or it could be a company's currency. Like if you have to use some video game currency, if you're buying something like Xbox points or something like that, if you're buying something on Xbox platform, anything like that. So you'll convert your Bitcoin into whatever currency you want, spend the currency, but then otherwise you'll keep as many Bitcoins as you can.
Okay, so this is we're getting to some really important questions now. This one at the moment keeps coming in. I've had it happen to me 3 times. Only the other day, one of my friends, Bitcoin was around 27,000, was thinking of investing. And it went up to 40,000. She said, I can't do it. It's too expensive now. But Vijay, come on. Are we too late? Is Bitcoin too expensive?
No, I definitely don't think we're too late. And I think anyone who's listening to your show is very, very early. I kind of think the question is like asking, am I late to the internet in 1999? And to give an example of that, if you'd bought Amazon at the absolute peak of the dot-com bubble, you would be, and you had held on to it, you'd be up like 15,000% or some huge number now. So sort of locally in that period of time, it might have felt really hard and like, oh man, the value of my stocks have crashed. But really, when you zoom out and you look back in time, you realize that we were really, really early in the internet in 1999, and much of the value creation was to come in the future. And this is sort of a lesson of history that people tend to overestimate the importance of something in the short term, but they underestimate it in the long term. And I think that's definitely true of Bitcoin. I think people are underestimating how important this is going to be in the long term. And so when I talk about Bitcoin, a lot of people like to talk about the price is going to be so-and-so in the next month or in the next year. I really have a time horizon of 20 to 50 years when I think Bitcoin will transform the world. And whatever happens in the meantime before then, I could be wrong, I could be right about my predictions. But I have very, very high confidence this is going to transform the world for my children.
Well, we're going to get into some...
Yeah, on that question of, is it too late to buy Bitcoin, right? Is Bitcoin too expensive at $40,000 per coin or whatever price? I think I agree with Vijay here, which is that no, we're still extremely early. And my thought is that if you can still buy a Bitcoin for dollars, you're early. In other words, if there's a person out there who will give you a Bitcoin for a stack of dollars, right? You give them a stack of dollars, they give you a Bitcoin, then you're still early. Because eventually there will come a day where no stack of dollars will be enough. No, millions, billions, there's no stack of dollars that will be enough to convince someone to give you their Bitcoin. People would rather have the Bitcoin. It's just like if you take any paper currency, any fiat currency that has already died, right? How many of those would it take to buy a Bitcoin? Infinitely many. It doesn't matter how many of these, right, deceased paper currencies you have. No amount would be enough to entice someone to give you their Bitcoin. Eventually, every paper currency that's on the planet today, like the US dollar, the euro, the pound, the yen, all of those currencies will eventually meet that criterion as well, where it doesn't matter how many of those pieces of paper you have, you won't be able to get a Bitcoin. So is it too late to buy a Bitcoin? My goodness, if you still can buy a Bitcoin, it's not too late. Eventually, you'll only be able to earn them. Like you'll have to work for Bitcoins. But now you can just buy them. My goodness, it's still very early. At least that's my opinion.
Which takes me to another point, which is the volatility, because I think this is something else that puts people off. They think it can't be money because it's volatile. They're scared to invest because it's volatile. Most people are scared. I had it the other day. Someone sent me a text. They'd bought in at 36,000. It dropped to 33, and they panicked and sold. So let's talk about volatility.
Yeah, so I think you need to start by answering the question of why is Bitcoin volatile? And there is literally no way that you can have an asset go from zero to being a world reserve currency, which is worth trillions of dollars, without volatility in between. It's not possible. So the volatility is really a function of more people deciding to save in Bitcoin, which raises its price. And right now, just like you said, there's only a few % of the world who own Bitcoin. When Bitcoin reaches widespread adoption, the volatility in its price is going to decrease significantly because there's not going to be new savings flowing into Bitcoin. And it will have volatility which is comparable to gold when gold was money, which is it might move 1% or 2% up or down over a year, but it's going to be very, very stable. So until we get there, though, you should expect volatility. It's the volatility of massive amounts of new savings moving into Bitcoin, and then sometimes it gets ahead of itself and some people panic and then it'll pull back a little bit. That's where the volatility is coming from. It should be expected.
Okay, so if I'm...
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with him. Basically, you can't have an asset go from nothing, right, worth nothing, that doesn't exist, and then all of a sudden it's born, right? You can't have it go from that state to a global reserve currency or a global reserve money without volatility in between, right? It's just impossible. So we're going to see a tremendous volatility. We've already seen it, and the volatility will get smaller over time, for sure. And it has, right? You can measure it. So... yeah, I mean, why is it volatile now? Well, it's a bunch of people basically changing their opinions of Bitcoin along the way. Like, I really want it. Okay, I'm not sure. And now I want more of it. Now I want less. Now I'm scared. I got to get out. Now this and that. And people are in and out, and some people are just trying to make money from the price going up and down. Other people are long-term holders, hodlers who believe in it. And other people are just dabbling, and they're not really sure what they're doing. So it's a combination of everybody's opinion all at once, and that's what makes the market beautiful. But the result of that is when you have a very young asset class, people are not sure how to value it, and they're in, they're out, it's up, it's down. It's going to be very volatile until the long term. And so if volatility scares you, then it's understandable why you're not attracted to Bitcoin. However, if you can take a long-term view and not check the price of Bitcoin and not worry about it and build conviction in a long-term investment thesis, then the volatility doesn't matter. So you got to figure out yourself what your reasons are for investing, what your reasons are for owning Bitcoin if you choose to, and under what circumstances you would change your investment thesis, you would change your mind, what are your contingency plans. I mean, you got to figure out all this stuff for yourself, and probably the most important thing is to understand your own emotions. Right? Your own emotions for why you would want to buy, why you would want to sell, how you're going to feel when you're checking the price, or if you feel good not checking the price. So a lot of things to consider, but in terms of the volatility, it's going to be there. You got to know that it's going to be there, and it should reduce over time. So what you do with that volatility is up to you.
Well, maybe I've gone a step further, Vijay. Maybe I've been to Coinbase or Kraken and I've had a look and I'm thinking of buying, and I've seen that there's like these other things. There's Bitcoin Cash, there's Ethereum, there's all these other cryptocurrencies. Some of them seem cheaper. Maybe they can go up to $40,000. Maybe I'll make a lot more money if I invest in them. Like, I know why we shouldn't, but you tell anyone listening why they need to focus on Bitcoin only.
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous to get fixated on the nominal price of something, and choosing to buy one of these altcoins versus Bitcoin, in my mind, is kind of like saying, should I buy Enron at $1 or should I buy Amazon at $50? And the vast majority of these altcoins are outright scams that were created to make the founders of these coins rich. That's not true of all of them, but the vast majority. So you have to be very, very careful out there. And I don't think people who are new to this market should overthink it. This is a winner-take-all market, as it is in any market where there's a strong network effect. And the safest thing to do is to put your money in the asset or the company or whatever it is that has the biggest lead or has the lead. And in the case of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin has a massive lead. It's not even close. So you could have said the same thing about social networks in, say, 2010. Do I put some money in MySpace or do I put some money in Facebook? Facebook seems really expensive. MySpace is much smaller. But it's a winner-take-all market, and Facebook took the entire market, and MySpace is dead. And if you actually look at the history of altcoins, the vast majority of them die after a couple of years because there really isn't anything to them except a means of making money for their founders.
Yeah, I agree with what he's saying here about altcoins. I do want to clarify one thing, because he says it's generally a winner-take-all market, and he's right, but he's not really saying what the market itself is. And for people who haven't really thought about this or who don't understand, they might think it's the cryptocurrency market, right? I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but I don't think that's really what he intends here, and it's certainly not what I think. So the market in question is sort of what thing is going to be the predominant money, digital money, of the world, right? Something is going to be the predominant digital money of the world, as distinguished from currencies, right? I'm distinguishing between money and currency. And really only one thing is going to be money. I think it's going to be Bitcoin. I would argue that there aren't even any competitors, right? In the cryptocurrency space. So yeah, there are other cryptocurrencies, but I would argue that they don't even compete in the same market. They're trying to be currencies. They're trying to be remittance currencies. They're trying to be smart contracts. They're trying to be all these other different things that are not money. So the money market is a winner-take-all market. There's going to be one. It's just like how gold has been the predominant money for thousands of years, and there's not like a fifth best money or a number 10 money. It's not there. I mean, you have gold and you also have silver as like a sidekick, which is more portable, more divisible. And so it makes sense to have two different ones of two different sizes, but you don't have like 15 of the best monies throughout history. Like you have gold and silver, that's it. And in the digital space, we're probably going to see the same thing because it doesn't make sense. There's no value to having a third, fourth, fifth, 10th money. There's no reason for it. However, there's tremendous value in having hundreds of currencies, thousands of currencies. And we've seen this in the physical space, right, even before the internet, with physical paper currencies and so forth. And we're going to see it in the cryptocurrency space as we already are. There will be hundreds or thousands of cryptocurrencies or digital currencies that survive and capture some of their respective markets. But the market for global money is basically a winner-take-all market, and Bitcoin is the only player. Not only does Bitcoin have a tremendous lead, there really isn't a competitor. When you get down into the nitty-gritty and understand what these cryptocurrencies are trying to do, there's really nothing that is trying to be money, which is purposely slow, by the way, and purposely energy intensive. There's no cryptocurrency project out there that I'm aware of that is saying, let's try to be slower than Bitcoin. Let's try to be more energy intensive. That way we can be more decentralized and more secure and create an even bigger computer network, which is a better money. I just don't see it. I'm not even aware of the discussions. I'm not aware of people even trying to slow down Bitcoin. Everyone's trying to speed it up. Everyone's trying to make it use less energy, be more scalable, faster transactions, cheaper transactions. But that set of properties is a feature of currencies. There will be hundreds of currencies, thousands of currencies. But the problem is those currencies tend to be created very easily. Like there's not a lot of energy required to create new ones. You can create those tokens or coins, generally speaking, by fiat. Like you just say, all right, we're creating 1 million tokens. We're creating 1 billion tokens, whatever it is. And so the value of those tokens will tend to go towards the amount of energy required to make new ones. And if you can just make them out of nothing, then the value of those tokens will tend towards nothing. So anyways, as it pertains to the point here in the podcast, if you are interested in buying Bitcoin and you go onto an exchange like Coinbase or Kraken or wherever you go, and you see all these altcoins that are cheaper, that have a lower nominal price, it's easy to get confused and think, oh, these are all just cryptocurrencies. Oh, they're basically interchangeable. But the truth is they are not. They are completely different things. It's like if you go to a stock market and you're like, I want to buy a share of Walmart or something like that, and you get there and you see, oh, there's this other company that has cheaper shares. Whatever, it could be a car company, it could be industrial metals, it could be anything, it could be electronics. It's not the same as buying Walmart. It's completely different. They don't compete, so it doesn't even make sense to look at the price of one stock relative to the price of another stock if they don't compete, if they're not in the same industry. And the same is true with cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is digital money. All these other cryptocurrencies are, generally speaking, something completely different. So it doesn't make sense to compare their prices.